Welcome to the English Homemaker podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things home, a realistic but fresh view of homemaking from the suburbs of the south of England. I'm your host, Alyssa Evelyn. Welcome to episode 21 of the English Homemaker. Hello everybody, how are you today? I hope you're having a really lovely day. The autumn has super set in here in England. It's officially October. And I'm just really excited to come to you with this episode today. It's much anticipated. I'm going to be talking about home education. It's another solo podcast from me. And I'm just going to share our story, things we've learned, what we're doing now, and how it's going. I just think I've been asked a lot of questions and a lot of assumptions are made about home education. And I guess I want to bust a few myths today, talk about a few things, and just be really open and honest with you about everything we've learned, why we started, how it's going, what's happening now, and just talk through everything. I feel like I should definitely start this whole podcast off by talking about kind of extremes, judgment, both ends of the scale. I feel for sure that home education in the UK has got a bit of a reputation. Some people think it's like homeschool was 30 years ago, and some people think it's like what you see on Instagram. And I really want to say that it's kind of like neither of those things, and that also super depends on the family that's doing it, the children, the parents, the whole family structure, where you live as well is really important and plays a huge part in what you're able to do as a home educating family, and how your day-to-day and week-to-week function and how you're able to do it. Now, also, there's a whole kind of philosophy behind home education, and that's really important to talk about. I think a lot of people have very, very strong feelings. I know people have very strong feelings one way or the other for home education. It seems to be a really polarizing topic. Some people think it's terrible, you should never do it. And some people think it's literally the only way. Why would you ever send your kids to school? So I would love if every one of you listening will come at listening to this with a really open heart, an open mind, open ears, and just listen to what I have to say. I am just sharing our journey. It really is very specifically to do with us as a family, our dynamic and our children. And I will share the whole journey with you. But I do feel very nervous about this. It's very, very personal. And I think that's probably the key thing, is that every single home education journey, sometimes it might look similar on the outside. You know, if you're watching someone on Instagram or you're watching someone on YouTube, and we'll talk a bit about that later, you really only see a small part of the story. You see the shiny side, and there are lots of different sides to it, and there's lots of things people don't share, and there's a lot of trials, there's a lot of difficulties, and there's also a lot of privilege in it, and I'll be talking about that as well. So I probably should start by saying that this does come from a privileged place. I do understand that not everybody gets to home educate, but I do know a lot of families that bend over backwards to make home education work for their family, even though from the outside you think, how on earth are you making that work? You can make home education work when both of you are working. You can make home education work in so many different settings, whether you've got lots of money or not a lot of money. So whilst it does sound like a really privileged thing to do, and I do have a lot of privilege in that I'm able to be home with my kids if I want to, that's not the whole story. And I have met so many home educating families that do it in so many different ways. So with that all said, feeling like I've got a bit of a disclaimer under my belt, and feeling like you're all ready to listen openly and I can talk freely, let's start at the top. I'm going to try really hard to explain why we started home education, but it's very complex and it's not as simple as a one-liner. Last summer, 2023, was when it kind of all came to a head. This had been rumbling in the background ever since he started school. And he started school in COVID, which was a bit of a mess anyway. He's always been quite an independent thinker. He's really, really smart. Our son, he's now 8, almost 9. He really has deep passions about certain things, and yeah, he just gets like really carried away with a specific thing, like whether it's trains or planes. It's usually some kind of engineering based thing. Rockets is one of his current passions. Anyway, he's really, really smart, but when he started school, he wasn't treated that way. And whether it was because it was COVID, everybody was stressed, they were trying really hard to make things work in what was a really difficult situation. But it really impacted our son. He kind of got the rough end of the deal. He was kind of labelled as both stupid and naughty, which is not him at all from the very get-go. And then he sort of had these labels follow him around. And then he acted up to the labels, which is how kind of kids work. You have to treat them how you want them to act, if that makes sense. Like, you have to believe the best in them and they will then be the best in themselves, and the teachers need to do the same. So if a teacher isn't doing that for the child, they're not holding that space for them to become who they need to be in the best version of themselves, that's not the best teacher. And they can try and teach them as much maths and English and phonics and reading as they like, but if they don't believe the best in that person, they're not going to show you their best. We kind of had, his first teacher was a bit like that, and so he really, really struggled. And he really struggled with the class size as well. Now, this is going to kind of sound a bit funny. I don't think our daughter would struggle with the class size whatsoever. She'd probably thrive in a big group, but he just really struggled in the big classes. And it was a big school as well, so there were several classes per year. And there were just a lot of different things that led to kind of last summer. We just felt like he never finally relaxed. He just was holding so much anger and negativity, and he was just sort of exhausted, and he just could never really return to his normal self. And I was incredibly upset about that, as you might imagine, and felt very much like he needed a break. So we started looking at alternative options. We researched the idea of moving schools. So we looked at different schools in the area. We looked at maybe we could possibly put him in a small country school. We looked at private schools, most of which we could not afford. We looked at home education, all the different ways of doing that. And we settled on we would start by working with the school, because that was the best thing we could do. We thought we'd push that more. We spoke to the teacher a lot. We tried different interventions, and their kind of way of dealing with the situation of him being bullied on the playground was to just take him off the playground and put him in a little box room with a teacher and a bunch of other kids who struggled in the playground. And then we just felt like he was being labelled, and it just felt all very depersonal, and that they'd really missed what he was capable of, and it just felt all kinds of wrong. But we tried, and we kept trying, and by Christmas, well, before Christmas, it was really clear that we were pushing something that was just never really going to work. There just wasn't space for that school to care for our son in the way that he needed. And I think all children need, but some they're just different. All kids are a little bit different. Eventually, we sent in a deregistration letter, which is what all you have to do. You can send in a letter to the school and say, we would like to deregister my child from the school, and effective tomorrow or effective whatever date you choose. And that's all you have to do to start home education. It's not difficult. It feels very dramatic when you do it. And the school clearly hadn't had many of those letters in their life, or they made it seem that way. Anyway, for us, one of the sort of biggest reasons we held on for such a long time with school was that we really believe it's important for kids to be resilient. The world is hard. It's really hard. It's difficult. There's hard work. There's hard people to deal with. And we want them to understand that. We want them to know how to deal with it. But there just came a point where we realised that he wasn't becoming more resilient. He was really struggling to work out how to function in that space. He was hardening himself off. He was just becoming angry and bitter. And he was like 7. So we just felt that was completely inappropriate. And that however much they were supporting his education, they weren't supporting all that social learning, all the emotional things, the spiritual side of things. They just weren't dealing with it at all. So home education it was. And in January, we started with a bit of a plan and a programme. So in January, the kind of world of home education in our local area just sort of exploded, and we realised there were so many people home educating in this area. So many different groups we could go to, different kinds of groups, sports groups, science groups. We could have groups where I could leave the kids all day and pay for it, and they'd be with other home educating kids. Lots of different types of groups that we could hang out with, lots of craft groups, just lots and lots of opportunity to hang out with other home educating parents. And where we live, it kind of was in this lovely spot where I could go a little bit north, a little bit like west, east, and find different groups to hang out with, a little bit south as well. And there were sort of board game groups and tech groups, just an abundance of opportunity, and it was amazing. So we got to cherry pick and choose and try different things, and we spent the first term doing that in the afternoons and just trying out different things. Some things worked, some things didn't. I probably went a little bit too fast into it, and there's a kind of process that people call deschooling, which I don't really like the term. Again, it sounds a bit overly dramatic and political, but it is sort of important. I think ultimately the term just means that once you come out of school and you've come out and it has been a dramatic exit, and you need to kind of de-school, you need to take a break before you move into the next thing, because the kids' brains, especially if they've been in for a few years, are quite hardwired to do things in a very set way. And if you're going to change that routine, it's not just easy to switch from one to the other because the expectation has already been set. So to de-school, you just need to take a break. And for our son as well, he just needed to take a break and remember who he was. Just remember the goodness inside him, remember the goodness in other people. And that actually took a really, really long time. It wasn't a month, it wasn't a term, it was more like 6 months to remember that, he was an amazing, amazing child, an amazing boy with an amazing brain and a really big heart. And it took a long time for him to remember that and not believe what other people have been telling him for such a long time. So for us, deschooling was more about that kind of emotional, social side of things than anything else. So then let me tell you kind of how we did school. And what the legalities are here in the UK. So you do have a responsibility as a home educating parent to provide a good education for your child, but the terms can be quite flexible so long as you are actually doing something to do with work. They're quite flexible as to how you approach that and how you do it and what methods that you use. But they do want to know, so you do have to let your council know, or they ask you what you're doing, and you can either have them to your house or you can, I think, send them documents. I suppose it probably depends on which council you're in. We had an elective home education member of the local council come to our home, and she sat with us for a good hour and just chatted. She was so friendly and wanted to know what we were up to, and she gave us such a lovely report at the end of that. I think that was about 6 to 8 weeks into the whole journey, maybe a little bit later, it might have been 3 months in, so that we could really sort of get our feet wet, as it were. And that was actually a really positive experience for us. The home education lady was very, very friendly. She was really up for hearing what our projects were and what we were doing and what my son was interested in and what we were covering, and making sure that he was being social. She obviously was coming to check that his house looked safe and that I was looking after him properly, because the safeguarding aspect is really, really important in the home education space. My overall plan for home education was to look at the national curriculum, which you can really easily access online and download and print, and see what's expected of each year and just work out how I could fulfill that, and just tick all the boxes. And actually there was surprisingly little in there that I felt like my son would struggle with learning or I would struggle to teach him, and that most of it could be done in a really fun way, and that there wasn't too much on the list. There's actually a huge amount of social things that they're supposed to be learning every year, and that's listed in the national curriculum, which was a nice surprise. And I just made sure to I broke it down in a big Excel spreadsheet. And then the other thing I made sure to do was I kind of printed off some twinkle sheets and had some vague idea of projects for the week on the Sunday, so that I didn't go in completely blind to the week without any ideas. So I was kind of armed with things to do so no one got bored. But then ultimately the day kind of ran very similarly every day and was ultimately led by my son. So most days would start with CGP books. They're kind of very affordable books you can buy online, very sort of strictly follow the national curriculum here in the UK. And we would get those out. He would do a page of handwriting practice and a page of maths. And then we'd just go from there. I decided I would keep pretty strict records of the things we had done, not the things we were going to do and tick them off, but the things we had done. So at the end of every day, and slightly sometimes throughout the day, I'd write the things we were doing so that I had a really good record to show the council, my husband, anyone that asked. And it was fascinating to see what things we would manage to cover in a day that counted as learning. Not obviously just the book things, but just the overall learning. And I'll read out some of the entries because it's just so cool to look back on. So we would do things like colouring. We got this kind of gears, pulleys, cams, toy thing, and we just play with that for hours. We spent a week doing kind of like a big Japanese project study. So we would make sushi, eat sushi, learn about some of the history of Japan and, practice writing some of the characters. We built an entire hydraulic robot arm and learnt some of that. We would watch Mark Rober videos for more engineering ideas. We would bake together, cook together. We would play board games. Board games can be so educational. So we had a multiplication game that we played. Yahtzee's really good for practicing your counting skills. I did spend some time asking my son what he wanted to learn and writing that down, and we would just try and explore that, things he wanted to go and see, maybe music, like instruments he wanted to learn. Then we kind of went from there. Sometimes we went through my interests as well. So I would be sat watercolouring, and so he would be sat watercolouring too. Or maybe I would be making a quilt using my sewing machine and he would learn how to do those things alongside me. And that's one of the great benefits of home education, is that kind of practical, everyday, day-to-day life skills, and learning the routines of a home, learning how to do those things and cycle through the day is just a really lovely part of home education. It means that we spent some time applying for Blue Peter badges, and we practiced doing little typing exercises on the computer, and we spent time building K'NEX roller coasters. And what else do we do? I'm looking at spending time in the garden, learning how to weed, how to cut things back, learning about different plants. Most months we had some kind of obsession, and it did seem to work into months just sort of naturally. So I think most of January we spent watching a lot of Cirque du Soleil and just absorbing that part of culture and understanding it more. We had a month where we read one of the Narnia books, and both of the kids were obsessed with that. They listened to that read aloud like they've never listened to a read aloud before or after. Most of February was spent with Hamilton the musical playing in the background, apart from the rude songs, obviously. And I think even today, if you played that, the kids would remember every single lyric. That's appropriate. And then similarly, March was Come From Away, the musical, and they both loved that soundtrack as well. We actually ended up seeing Come From Away, the musical, during the week at a matinee. Me and my son went to see it, and it was phenomenal. One of the best musicals I've ever seen. And for my son, it was a really incredible experience. Well worth the price of the tickets, and just it blew his mind to see it live. One of the things we started doing regularly in the afternoons was a multi-sports group for home ed kids somewhere nearby. And that was really, really fun. The group that we met there were really loving and kind and similar to us, and lots to talk about. It was really interesting to see my son's progress over the course of that particular group. And we started that in about April and went through the summer term with that. And that was really, really lovely. And for me, I found a lot of really similar, like-minded home ed mummies. One of the things I just love about home education really is just how many different types of people home educate, and for so many different reasons. So for some people, it might be a religious thing. For some people, it might be that they've taken their kids out because of certain needs. For some kids and families, it's just that they want to spend more time outdoors or more time together. For some people, it's really deeply political or philosophical. There's sort of different groups for each of those different people, and it was just really nice when we sort of found our people that were doing it for similar reasons to us. There are so many different methods of home education. You can unschool, you can Charlotte Mason, you can Waldorf, you could do unit studies, you can do a traditional approach, an eclectic approach, a project-based approach, or you can just try and copy school at home. There are so many different ways of doing it that work for different families. I think we pretty much tried a little bit of absolutely everything. Most people say it takes a good year, maybe 2 years, to sort of find your tribe and find your rhythm, find your routine, find something that works for all of you together as a family at home. And that's definitely been our experience. It takes a really long time to find those groups, to find the people that you and your children click with, to find something that works for everybody, that meets all the needs that you all have. One of the things many people are concerned about with home education is the socialization aspect. But in 2024, it's very, very different to how it was when I was growing up. When that may have been the case, it would have been much harder to find people in your similar area. But now you just go on social media. There were Facebook groups I could join to meet other parents. There were just so many different ways of connecting with home educating families. One of the reasons people choose to home educate was to be more social, actually, not oddly, but for kids to have a chance to socialize with different types of people, to go and learn from adults, to spend time with children younger and older, and just kind of do group work that is mixed ages. And that's a real big pro of home education, I would say, actually. One of the other really cool things about home education that was a major pro for us was this idea that the kids could follow their own line of inquiry, their own ideas, their own thoughts. They could follow that and learn more and dig really deep into that and have the actual time to do so, and really, just dig into their own specific interests. When they were younger, both of the kids, we kind of did a Montessori approach to toddlerhood because it worked super well for all of us. But the kind of backfiring of Montessori, because Montessori is learning how to be independent, how to follow your own line of inquiry, is that then when you're asked to sit nicely in a classroom and listen and follow a lot of rules, the child's thinking, but no, like, I'm expected to be spoken to like a grown-up, I'm expected to be treated with respect, and then sort of the opposite happens in school, and they're just expected to sit and follow a huge amount of rules. And again, for some children that's not a problem and they thrive on that, and for others they're like, well, no, because I want to learn about X today. And that's a really great thing about home education, that you can do that. I really, really enjoyed that. So anytime we had an idea, we could just do it. We could research more, we could watch documentaries, we could go and get resources from the library, and that just was really fun for everybody. So back in June, me and my son sat down and wrote a pros and cons list of home education versus a traditional school. And you can probably tell which things from this list are things that he wrote and things that I wrote. So drawing and creating, outside time, play park freedom, more hot chocolates, cooking, trips whenever we like, slow mornings, and sleep. And sleep is such a big one. I should probably delve into that a bit more, but some kids are just naturally late to bed and naturally late to wake up. And for our son, it was really obvious that he needed more rest. And I think it has done him so much good having so much more sleep. In fact, we all had much more sleep. We were all waking up at 7:30 in the morning, most mornings at the beginning part of this year. Flexible hours, unlimited time, mostly. Different education styles, silliness is allowed, and so is singing, mostly. Freedom to choose to be you. Free toileting. Cheaper holidays, real life learning and skills, teamwork, family togetherness. I could delve so much more into some of those. The thing about silliness and being able to be yourself and being able to go to the toilet when you need for as long as you need are all really, really important human basic rights that a lot of people get very grumpy and aggressive about that not being possible in some schools. Their whole sense of family togetherness and kind of that pace of living that's just that bit slower was probably my favourite part of it. That kind of later mornings, lovely big long breakfasts, delving together into projects and just being together all the time. I absolutely loved it. I loved it. So now we're at about minute 25. It's time for me to tell you that actually the kids are both currently in school. And that might seem a bit crazy given I've just told you all those pros, but let me break it down for you and let me explain why we have chosen to do that, because it might seem a bit nuts after that list and all of that story, and maybe I might seem a bit, irrational or crazy to you in some way to be swinging from one way to the other. But Let's break it down. Let's talk about the cons side of this list, and let me just read through the cons side of the list that we wrote together. So there's no school trips. There's something kind of cute about a school trip with all your classmates that you just remember forever. And my son missed those. Not that he had very many. I think he had about one every year, I think, in his old school. Learning opportunities. So one of the great things about a professional teacher is that they just have way more ideas, and often much better ideas than I can conjure up. And doing it together in a group can often be a lot more fun. That sense of competition. Now, my son is not hugely competitive, but my daughter is, and she will do anything when there's another set of people, and she will try and do it better than them. More structure. So one of the things about home education is you can fill it with a really decent structure and have a really solid routine. Sometimes that's a little bit difficult, and actually the kids do need a really solid structure, and that's something that school does give, a very solid structure. Sometimes it's very irritating, but sometimes that's a blessing. Real life practice is the one I've put next. And what I really mean by that is that most people in the country have a job that's kind of 9 to 5 or 8 till 6 or 7 till 7, but it is structured, it's routines. You get out of bed, you put your work clothes on, you get out in the car or you walk and you get to your job, you do your job, you have a lunch break, you do more work, and you come home and you practice that. And for some of you, it's going to make you feel really icky that the kids are practicing that from a young age and getting into that kind of rhythm and routine and really setting that in their body. And for some of you, you might think, my kids are never going to have a structure like that. We don't as parents, or as a big family, we don't. Maybe you come from a farming family or an artsy family or a family where the structure is different. And that's obviously fine, and perhaps that would make you more keen to do home education where it is a bit more flexible and the life that you're going towards isn't about that kind of structure. But also I think there'll be home educated kids who were home educated the whole time out there who never had that kind of real life practice at school, but really are keen for that anyway and go towards it and really enjoy it. So I don't know, it's a pro and a con maybe. Easier transition to secondary school. That's something a lot of people think about. You have to think about the secondary school option and what kind of eventual education you want for your kids. Do you think they'll want to do some kind of internship or apprenticeship? Do you want them to go to university? Do you want them to do A-levels? Like, what is it you want for your kids? And we decided that our kids really can be whoever they want to be, but we want them to have the platform and the ability and the know-how to do whatever it is they want. And we are in no place to decide what that possibly could be at this point. The pressure isn't all on mummy is the next one. That's a really, really big one. Really, really big. We could go into that for days, but there was a lot of external pressure, especially from family members, that was being put on me to make sure that I was up to scratch and doing everything perfectly, and it was too much. I got pneumonia in March, and that was probably an indication that I was already suffering under the pressure rather than just being kind of a random thing that happened. Whilst I enjoyed every moment of home education, I did not enjoy the pressure and judgment I got from family and friends. I found that very, very challenging and a really deep learning lesson. I had a lot of really supportive people as well, I should mention that, but it was sort of a 50-50 split of all the people that I had already been in my corner of who really was behind me and who really wasn't, and who was very against. And we had some, I don't want to go into it. It was really not very nice there at points. The next thing I've put it in brackets, conforming to general rules of being. I think probably this should also be a con. Some of you may see that as a positive thing. Lots of parents want their kids to be like all the other kids. I don't want my kids to be like the other kids. I want them to be like themselves, but I do want them to know how to be in social settings and how to navigate that well. Discipline for life? ? All of these ones at the end, I'm like, it could be a positive, it could be a negative. It just depends on how you look at it. But school does provide some discipline that you have to get out the door. You have to be there on time. You have to do what the teachers tell you, and you have to learn how to submit to some kind of authority. Socialisation, I've kind of put in there as a positive, because whilst I have talked about socialisation being very positive at home, as at home education, during home education, there's nothing quite like that gang that you meet at school. And maybe you have a really good home educating group in your really local area that you can meet up with. Maybe you've even got neighbours that are home educating, or people on the road adjacent, and you can just go hang out with them. That would be amazing. For us, we did not have that. I didn't know anyone in the local area that was like immediately local that was home educating. I never got to meet anyone if there was anybody there. And we had to drive quite a way to meet anybody. We never met a family that were doing it that we could just hang out with, that we really clicked with. Yeah, there's nothing quite like the bond you make with the people that are in your class. One thing I didn't mention there in the pros list for home education is really that learning at your own pace. I think that's, again, a humongous reason why lots of people choose home education, is because some kids are just later to want to learn how to read, and that is totally okay. It's totally okay and should be totally okay. The same with maths. Maybe just they're not like really up in the maths, and actually a lot of parents believe that the kids should be the one to ask to learn how to do those things. They say, I'm ready to read now, can someone teach me how to read? Or like, I'd really like to learn how to add or subtract, or, you know, pay for things in a shop, and then it's sort of your job as the parent to teach them. I think it is absolutely bonkers that we just take all 4-year-olds and assume they're all ready to read. It's so crazy to me. And I think not Europe generally, because I think places like Sweden and Norway, they start at more like age 7 with that kind of more traditional learning, and that's usually when most people are ready to go. Some people would like to learn before that, and they probably have learnt at home through their own natural curiosity, or whatever, sort of, if they're at a preschool or something like that, they've probably already figured it out if they're so super eager. But I think we could benefit in this country from having it wait a little bit later. One of the things I talked a lot about with other home educating parents was simply just how the system of education is just really archaic. It's old. It needs updating. It needs adjusting for different abilities, and it just needs a bit of a refresh and a change, and it needs to allow for different styles of learning. It needs to not be judgmental on the children that are quote unquote behind because they're not reading when they're 5 and they don't want to and they have no interest in doing it. Or the kids that really, really thrive in playing outside and learning outside. There ought to be space for those children, or ones that want to spend way more time doing science. Really, I think we should have way more science in the curriculum and way more project-based learning. But that's beside the point. We decided it would be so cool if there were more different types of schools for our different types of learners. So, how did we get from home educating and absolutely loving it to not? Well, we never stopped loving home education, actually. I should probably say that. I would still be home educating if I thought that was definitely the best thing for the kids. But we do live in the UK. We live in the south of the UK. We live in Hampshire. And we have the friends we have, the family we have, and we are the family we are. And my daughter is the daughter that she is. She's the girl that she is. She was so keen to start school. She is, as I said before, she's very competitive. She's super smart. She was very, very ready to learn. She was very ready for school. And she's sort of like the queen bee in a social situation. She doesn't tuck herself off in a corner. She really, really thrives in that environment. So it was really clear that she would really do well in a school environment. We hummed and we hawed because she would also be very, very simple to home educate. She would have really, really enjoyed that. But we thought, let's see if we can find a school that's small, that's in the countryside, that we can send the kids to, that we could we'll see if it works. And that's still sort of where we are. We're just seeing if it works. And so we did find a school. We applied for the school. We didn't think for a second that we would get into this particular school, but we did. It's a state school, so we're not paying for it, but it is a phenomenal school. We've been so blessed with this particular school. It's got a very forward-thinking head. It's got a lot of opportunities. They really think outside the box. It's really fun for both of the kids. And so when we applied and we got this spot, we then spoke to our son and said, look, this was a school he'd been to for a day. He tried it out. So he had some idea of what it could be like. We said, do you want to go to this school along with your sister at the same time? Like, how do you feel about that? And he thought about it for a good couple of weeks. We had a lot of conversations about it. And he eventually was like, I'd really like to try. And they both started in September. And it has gone very, very well. I think over the course of the home educating time, it's given my son enough confidence in himself that he knows he's a good person, a good friend. He's got a big heart and he's got a big brain that's worth sharing. And so far, his teachers have been really receptive to him. He's got 2 teachers that are split and over the course of the week, and he does forest school for one morning a week in the school grounds, which is super cool. One of his teachers in particular just has so many kind things to say about all of his ideas, and at his previous school there was no space for him to share those ideas. There was no space for him to share part of himself or express thoughts, and he sort of gave up on sharing ideas and putting his hands up to ask questions, which is super sad. But at this school it's not the same, partly because there's far fewer students, so there's just more time for him, which is absolutely wonderful. My daughter, of course, is getting on like a house on fire. She loves it. She's really game for all the learning, all the social aspects of it. And she goes in with a big smile and comes out with a big smile. And they both have made lots of friends. One of the great things is that my son, who previously really struggled on the playground, when we communicated that to the school, they actually acted on it. They have sort of like playground leaders and monitors and stuff that are kids, as well as the adults, obviously, who have actually helped him integrate, helped him learn to play games with other people, guided him to new friends. And that I just could get me super emotional, but it's a really, really big deal to have friends at school that really boost you and encourage you and are there for you. And that's a really big deal to me. And that are similar as well. I think his last school, there were a lot of like football guys, but not many like nerdy science guys. And he's definitely one of the more nerdy science guys. And there are definitely more of those at this school, even though there are far fewer students. So that's been really nice. So far, so good. But I'm aware that things could change. I know how easy it is to start home education again. And I know how much we would all enjoy it. So for now, whilst they're really, really enjoying the wonders of packed lunches and making explosive volcanoes and soundproofing boxes and going on conker walks and listening walks and doing forest school and all of the wonderful things they've already been doing at this school, I am holding it lightly, and I'm aware that I have options. I know how my son's brain works, what he needs in order to thrive, and what it looks like when he's struggling. Another big thing that we had to consider when moving the kids back to school was how it would affect me, because it's a big drive, that's a big commitment, getting them all out of the door. I mean, one of the things most home educating families say is how fortunate we all are for not having to do the school run anymore. So I had to kind of get around that hurdle in my mind and turn that into a positive rather than a negative. And yeah, just be okay with the kids not being here all the time, because that was going to be a big adjustment for all of us. And actually, because we thought about it in advance, we could put some things in place that made it feel better, and we're mindful of it and we're working on it. I think one of the biggest questions we had to ask ourselves anytime in the future with thinking about what education is best for our kids is you and we and one has to answer the question of, what are you training them for? What world do you want them to learn to see and believe in? And the previous school was sending different messages to this current school, and home education was also sending a different message. And we had to decide which one, fit with the answer we had for those questions. And that's going to be different for every single family. So I can't answer that for you, but there are different ways of doing it. And I also think there should be some freedom in trying different things out, just trying it for a season, and that being okay and being a really good thing and really positive thing. So I do want to share some of my favourite resources with you, but I want it to come with a humongous word of caution. Following anyone that talks about home education on the internet can be incredibly dangerous. People are so opinionated one way or the other. And as I said at the beginning of this podcast, it's a lot more nuanced than that. There are a lot of people that are really firmly on the side of home education for so many reasons. And it can be very easy to be swept into kind of like a bit of a cult mindset about that. So I would caution anyone thinking about home education to not be following anyone on social media that does home educate, so as you can be sure that it is in fact your opinion and not theirs that you're following. But when you have made that decision and you're in that space, it's tremendously helpful to have ideas and feel supported. And that is one of the great things about home education in 2024 is we have so many people we can look to for advice and ideas. And there's also a lot of fear-based content around home education. And I'm cautioning you through the fear of the fear, aren't I? Do it mindfully and cleverly. But yeah, be careful when someone's sort of giving you like, we mustn't do this because this might happen way of doing it. You have to make decisions. As with most things in life, your choice has to be made through love. You don't do it because you're afraid your child's going to turn out this way. You do it because you love your child and you want the best for them. So with that said, I'm going to recommend one book that really changed the way that we considered home education as a kind of whole thing. And it's called Educating the Wholehearted Child. It's by Clay Clarkson with Sally Clarkson alongside. And it is a Christian home education book. So I will say that, a little heads up. But because we come from a Christian background, it spoke volumes to both of us, and it made it seem like home education was just so much more about the kind of spiritual, emotional side of things. And that is obviously what we were looking for at the time. And it is a huge, fat book full of ideas and details and really practical guides, as well as just advice. And it was sensible and honest and a really good book. So I'm actually not going to recommend any other books, but I will recommend a few Instagrams and YouTubes in case you want to have a brief look into this world and know a little bit about what it's about. Most of these people I still follow, but I have them on mute because to be sort of faced with all that lovely homeschool content all the time just isn't super helpful when my kids are at school. But if we went back into the world of home ed, these are the people that I would look to for advice. So first up, it would be Sally Clarkson. She just talks about home education in just this very peaceful, relaxing way, like it's going to be okay and everything's going to turn out just fine. And she also has many, many decades of experience of home education. Another person with lots of experience is Shayla from Singing a New Song Homeschool. She's also on YouTube, and I'll make sure all these links are in the description. And she makes really amazing, detailed content of how she does the day-to-day, how she does her planning, and I found that really, really helpful and encouraging. Then there's A Little Glam, A Lot of Mum. She makes lovely YouTube videos. Again, shows you some of the details of resources she uses, how she does a day and what she's done. She's also got lots of experience under her belt. And then I'll just list off a couple of really lovely accounts. 5 Little Birds, Nicole Schiffler, Treehouse Schoolhouse, Lucy Disco, Keri Botch, The Peaceful Press, Tiger Lily Quinn. Those all have really lovely, very practical accounts and ideas and inspiration. So there you have it. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode, no matter whether you're a parent of really young children and you're considering your options as they are going into school age, or whether you already have got children at school, whether you're way past that stage and you're just interested to learn what the current world of home education is like. I hope there was something for everyone in that. I mean, I think hearing anyone's story is always helpful. We always learn, and that's kind of why this podcast exists, because sharing stories is a really important part of how we learn. And I'm really always eager to share, even though this was a bit of a nerve-wracking one. I hope it was useful to you. My main wish in this podcast ending is that you feel like you're not judged, like you are free to choose whichever option is going to work for your family, and that hopefully I've given you some things to think about to help you make that decision in a really clear way that you feel really confident in. For me, the hardest part of home education has been the judgment I receive from other people throughout the process, and that if I'd have had support and understanding, I think it would have gone maybe differently, but definitely smoother and happier. So I hope this has expanded your mind, opened your mind, given you things to think about. And if you have questions, I'm always available on Instagram at the English Homemaker. Send me a DM, ask me questions. I'm really happy to answer things. And check over there for updates, links and things like that. They'll also be in the description. If you did enjoy this and it's something that you're thinking about, maybe share it with a friend or family member so you can have a conversation. Let this be your conversation starter about home education if it's something you're thinking about. And if you liked it, do just follow along. Subscribe, follow along on whatever channel you're listening to, or follow me over on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day. Bye.